Started. So thank you guys for joining us today for our Wayfinding series. I'm Nicole Dale, I'm the Director of Career and Alumni Services, and I get the lovely honor of introducing our speaker today. The Wayfinding series tell you a little bit about wayfinding, in case I see some familiar faces, but some of you may not know. The Wayfinding series is a RMCAD's career-focused series. It connects students to local creative professionals and is brought to you by Career and Alumni Services Department in conjunction with the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program. With equal parts inspiration and honesty, speakers in this series will share their path toward a successful creative life and the twists and turns involved in that journey. And so we begin with our guest speaker, Danny Zayas, a Miami native. Danny studied film at New York University before co-founding From the Hip Photo in Denver, Colorado, 11 years ago. Danny works with international brands like Charles Schwab, Marriott, as well as a diverse clientele, including art museums and galleries, record labels, breweries, clothing labels, startups, restaurants, and festivals. As Chief Love Officer, one of Danny's responsibilities is spearheading partnerships with nonprofits and art organizations as part of the studio's mission to return 20% of the sales back to the community via pro bono projects. We are so glad to have Danny here to share a little bit about his career path with all of you today. Please welcome Danny Zayas.
Hi, everybody. Nicole, thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you all for coming out on the first snowy day of the fall/winter season. It's really humbling to be able to get to spend time with you today and talk a little bit about my journey as a creative professional, to hopefully impart some advice from the lessons that we've learned along the way and to be able to answer any questions that you have. That was a good intro. That is obviously not a photo of me. Pretty much all of the photos you see here were shot either by myself or by Nina, who's sitting there. She is the other founder of From the Hip. We're also married. We'll get to that. And without further ado, I was curious if anyone knows who either of the groups of people in this photo are. There's a head shaking in the back, maybe. The second one's harder. That's a good guess. So you are correct on the left as the Sex Pistols. For those who are unfamiliar, they are widely recognized as being the band who kind of ushered in the punk rock movement in the late 70s. And in an era where music was really dominated by sort of bloated prog rock and the emerging sounds of disco, what the Sex Pistols brought to the table was this DIY ethos that really hadn't been present in the music industry before. They said, not only can anybody start a band and make music, but you don't really even have to be good at it to do it. It's just the intention, right? You have the passion, you have the motivation. Anyone can make art. They performed in 1976. They're from London. They played this gig in Manchester that became known as the gig that changed the world, which is a little bit hyperbolic, but in that audience that day was a pretty extraordinary group of people, including Stephen Patrick Morrissey, who started the Smiths and is still releasing records today. Joy Division was in the audience. The Clash famously started their band right after being inspired by this show. Marky Smith from The Fall, the two gentlemen who started Factory Records, which was the home of New Order, and Joy Division before that, and later became sort of the epicenter of the emerging electronic dance music scene and rave culture. So a lot of people in one room. And the joke after this show was that by the time the Sex Pistols got back to London, everyone in Manchester had started a band. And so even though that's obviously a little bit facetious, just the act of getting in front of that crowd of people and doing something that really hadn't been represented before had this phenomenal impact. The other group that was there is the Buzzcocks, and actually the two singers of the Buzzcocks were the ones who organized the show. So they didn't have their band yet, but they wanted to get the Pistols out to Manchester, and then they were similarly inspired. And they had a pretty phenomenal contribution as well, which was they took that DIY spirit of anyone can make art And they took it to the next level. They crossed that into this commercial threshold where they said, not only can we get up on stage and play, we don't need a major record label. We're just going to go into the studio and record 4 songs, and we're going to self-release it. So they teamed up with their manager at the time. They created their own record label, which, again, the perspective on this is really difficult because we live in an age where everyone has so much agency. Everyone has a platform, right? Everyone has social media accounts and access to an audience. So to transport yourself back to 1977 and think the only way you get music out as a band is if a major label signs you and gives you the money to go into a studio and do all of this. They pressed 1,000 copies of this 4-song EP that sold out basically immediately. And what they created was this inversion where the major record stores, Virgin Records was the large UK retailer at that time, came to them and said, give us 15,000 copies of your record. And so suddenly we had this generation of young people who were coming up realizing, I don't need permission. I can go out and do this. I can make the art and not worry about having it distributed. I can be a distributor. And this coincided with a really burgeoning scene of independent publishing. Suddenly zines were coming. It took this kind of, Beat Generation happening mentality from the 60s and ratcheted that up into a really different territory. The other part of this that's really critical is that not only could they do it, but they could do it in a way that wasn't compromising, right? They weren't being told how to produce a record. They weren't being told who to work with. They were just doing it on their own terms, and all of that was really unprecedented. When I was putting this together, I came across this quote from Pete Shelley, who was one of the singers, and it seems, on the surface, it's so simple, but there's a lot of profundity to it. He said, I find it easy coming up with ideas for songs. Finishing them is where the work is. And the reason I put that up and was sort of struck by it is over the years, I've sort of come to, I hate to use the word mantra, but I've adopted this idea that the genius is in the doing. And that's why I'm talking about the Sex Pistols and punk rock and the DIY spirit, because really the most important thing that anyone can do in their artistic journey is just do the stuff. Nobody has a favorite half-written song or a favorite half-designed piece of architecture, right? Half-drafted screenplay. The only reason we appreciate and are influenced by art and inspired by art is because someone made it happen the full way through. We're going to talk more about that. Also going to talk a little bit about this idea of artistry being equivalent to entrepreneurship. That's a term that I think in our current climate has some baggage to it, has certain connotations. But the truth is, I think that at the most basic level, every artist is an entrepreneur. And then the other thing I really want to talk about is seeing new opportunities, which to me is a really fundamental element of being any kind of artist. It's being able to sort of be a time traveler, to see things that aren't there and project yourself into those spaces. So before we go there, a little bit of kind of personal history and my narrative and the backstory of how I got to where I am and what we're doing at From the Hip. So like I said earlier, Nina and I co-founded it. We're closing out our 11th year of doing this full-time. We've got a 7-person team that does photo and video. We have amazing interns. We've actually had a lot of great ones from RMCAD over the years as well. And the other nice thing is that 3 years ago, we moved into a really lovely brick and mortar space over at Stanley Marketplace. I don't know if anybody's been out there, but it's been fantastic and really invigorating for us. We're part of a community of 55 businesses there that are all independent. They're all locally owned. You go in and the owners are there working hard. That's very inspiring to us. In terms of what we do with our projects, we're really focused on 3 areas. We work with people, we work with brands, and we work with nonprofits and different kinds of organizations. On the people side, it's pretty much everything that someone might need. So starting from newborn babies through anniversaries, we do a lot of wedding work and engagements. We've cultivated some really beautiful relationships with families over the years who come back every year or two, and we've seen children grow up. We've seen couples go on this journey from proposal to engagement to wedding to starting their own families, and that is incredibly fulfilling. The brand piece of what we do is also really exciting because it's an area where we can leverage a lot of creative control in the service of helping local businesses or sometimes big businesses connect with their audience. And there's a lot of fun storytelling that's involved with that. So again, it runs the full gamut from doing shoots for magazines. We do a lot of product work. I'm sure you've all eaten at restaurant clients of ours like Illegal Pete's and Chiba Hut. We get to travel the country helping to photograph conferences and conventions. A big thing that's emerged for us over the last few years has been on the social media side, helping businesses market themselves through their social media platforms. That's something that continues to be really important and emerging and is hopefully part of your education right now as you're coming through all this. And that creative direction piece I mentioned, which is helping companies figure out how they can do a better job of connecting with the people that they want to connect with and tell their stories in a way that's authentic. Who do we work with? We work with mom and pops, we work with startups, we work with a lot of big brands, like the folks on the screen. And that's really exciting for us because we get to touch on not just a really wide variety of industries, but businesses of all sizes, people who are at different places in their own entrepreneurial journeys. So yeah. And then probably the most gratifying piece of what we do is over the years we've been able to build out a pretty robust social responsibility piece to our business. So we take 20% of our sales every year and we put that back into pro bono work in the community. I feel like we are extremely fortunate to have started a business in Denver, which is a really philanthropic, caring, supportive city. Not all places are that way, and we've had a lot of good role models who we could kind of model our own programs on. But some of the more relevant ones are the Denver Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art. We do all of their photography. The Denver Film Society has the Denver Film Festival coming up at the end of the month. We do all of their events. Colorado Photographic Arts Center, Black Cube, a lot of really interesting organizations that are supporting local artists and finding new ways to connect with the people who appreciate art locally here. I'll do this part pretty quickly, but my own bio, I was born in Miami a couple years after the Mariel boat lift, which I don't know if anyone knows about, but it was a huge and sudden, basically overnight wave of immigration from Cuba to Miami that totally transformed the city. I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant who came to the United States with basically the clothes on his back and not knowing any English. And the important thing to me growing up there was just that the city is permeated with this sense of hustle. Rick Ross, if there are any Rick Ross fans, the song Hustlin', he grew up a few miles away from me in Liberty City. And that's just the mentality. When I was 6 years old, I was going door to door selling mangoes from the tree in my backyard. And it's not because I was thinking about these things, it's just because people do what they have to do and you see it all around you. And there's that power of osmosis. So it was an interesting place to grow up. When I was in 6th and 7th grade, that's when I discovered those bands at the beginning, and that was really transformative, just understanding that, yeah, you can go out and make art, you can do things, you don't need to wait for opportunities to come to you. When I was in 7th grade, I started my first band. I didn't know how to play anything, but I figured if I started the band, then that would make me learn how to play guitar. And I did very poorly, but it got me there. And then very similarly, when I was in high school, I started a zine because I wanted to get records from my favorite labels. And so if I've got the publication, now there's a justification to send me things and I'll write about them. When I was 15, I started DJing, same kind of thing. I wanted more records, and I found someone who was willing to mentor me and give me that opportunity. And then I went out to New York, where I studied film. For anybody with a working knowledge of recent US history, I arrived in New York at late August of 2001. So again, an interesting time. I lived in Lower Manhattan, and on September 11th, I had this very prescient moment where when I walked out onto the street, the first thing I did was I ran into a drugstore and bought a disposable camera. And instead of photographing the Twin Towers, I turned around and I took photographs of the people who were all just standing kind of slack-jawed and flabbergasted in the middle of the street because everything had come to a halt and everybody's standing with their arms up in the air. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but now it seems so obvious. My first impulse was to document it, to break out a camera. So that's not to bring down the mood, but I think there's something in that was deep within me already. In more positive news, while I was out there, again, I started a couple of DJ club nights because I wanted to meet people and I wanted to have an active role in the art community there. Nina walked in one night and we were sort of instantly inseparable. That was over 16 years ago, and I was blown away. I'd never met somebody who was such a talented artist, among many other very redeeming, wonderful qualities about Nina. And while all of that was happening, I started to work at this clothing company that, right place, right time, was very, very small and suddenly blew up overnight. And I was thrust without really any qualifications into this role of marketing director. I was traveling across the country, opening retail stores. I was managing inventory. I was doing hiring and firing. I was like 21 years old. I had no business doing any of this stuff. But it was this tremendous learning moment. And it made me realize, it was the thing that made it click, that, oh yeah, all along I've been an entrepreneur. I haven't been thinking about it in those terms because I've been playing in bands and I've been DJing and I've been writing about music. But all of these artistic endeavors were just an extension of that entrepreneurship. So when we came out here, we had wanted to work together for a long time. We'd been building our romantic partnership, and that was important to us, that we have a joint creative outlet. And it happened pretty serendipitously. We started doing a lot of photography projects. We had things that were published in Westward, and then people started coming up to us and saying, hey, my friend is getting married. Would you consider doing that? And we said, yeah, of course. Let's do it. Let's do the work. We'll figure it out later. We'll learn how to play guitar after the fact. Part of that was knowing that, she's got an MFA in painting, and I had my art school degree, so we weren't wholly unqualified. But there was that understanding of we'll rise to that challenge. We'll put ourselves in that crucible, and then good things will happen. So the two things I would say about starting the company, one is that we came into it with this mindset of, if we're going to do something together, we want it to be exceptional. We want to take care of people. We want to make sure that everybody who leaves has this gush-worthy experience where they're not just happy or satisfied, but they actually want to go and talk to people about how great this thing was. And it's so easy as, individuals living in a capitalist society, it's easy to think about bad experiences that you've had as a consumer, or like the shitty experience that you had at a restaurant that makes you want to leave a 1-star review. But there's this whole other world at the other end of that spectrum that we focused on and said, what are all the little things we can do to let people know that we actually care about them? That as artists who are making a living doing photography, that we feel fortunate every day that we can wake up and actually make a living in this manner. So that was there from the outset. And then the other portion to that was this idea of embracing things that were a little frightening. So shooting that first wedding, not even shooting it, booking that first wedding, when we didn't have a single photograph in our portfolio of a wedding, it was terrifying. And so we took it upon ourselves to say, okay, if it scares us, it's probably good. Let's do that. We'll come back to that idea in a moment. Has anyone ever come across this term, Kaizen? It's a Japanese concept that is somewhat in vogue right now in kind of business management thought, but it's really simple. And as an artist, this is one of the best ideas that you can buy into. Most fundamentally, it just means continual improvement. This idea that you are committed to the notion that today you want to be better than you were yesterday. And I would say as an artist, there's this really healthy impulse you can cultivate about being embarrassed about the work that you did in the not so distant past. If you can look back on the painting you painted 3 years ago, or the piece that you wrote, or the photograph you took, and not with a sense of shame, but with a sense of knowing what I know now, with the experiences I have, I would do things differently. I would change the lighting, I'd use a different lens, I'd approach this from a different angle, I would have retouched it differently. That's something that has been so fundamental to our approach from the outset. And part of that is embracing the idea that all of us, really, we know so little. There's always so much more to learn, and that so greatly outweighs any expertise that we've built up. So being receptive, building out a team and saying every person who joins our team has insight and perspective and experience to offer, that is so fundamental. Being restless in a good way, never settling for complacency. So with the kind of Kaizen piece and the gush-worthiness piece in mind, we got things going. And I want to interject a little story too to close out the kind of Kaizen thought that I read about the other day that blew me away. So in 2017, LeBron James was in his 15th year in the NBA, which is so much longer a career than pretty much anybody gets. And he's LeBron James. He's like the greatest basketball player in the world. Like, how many people will ever have anything approaching the notion that they are the best in the world at anything, right? And he was having some arm problems and was really unhappy with how things were going. So at this point in his career, he decided he was going to completely relearn how to make jump shots. He was going to change his form from start to finish. He had fallen down to where he was one of the worst percentage shooters in the entire NBA. And he would show up at arenas 10 hours before his games and just practice jump shots with this new form. And by the end of the season, he was the 7th best shooter in the league. And I think about how someone in his position would find it so easy to just rest on his laurels and his accolades and his fame and say, I'm LeBron James. Whatever I do on that court is going to be amazing. Even if I'm the worst shooter in the NBA, I'm still going to be a leader. I'm still going to be that person that's inspiring my team. And it wasn't good enough for him. And I think it's that kind of edge that drives, whether you're a basketball player or a painter or a photographer, you need that inside you. You need to be a little bit, I don't want to say unhappy, but not complacent, right? There's always that room for improvement. Today, in terms of where the company is, my focus has shifted a lot. I'm not behind the camera nearly as often as I used to be, and that was very intentional. We hit a point where we said, we've arrived at a certain level here. For the next level to happen, what do we want to do? We want to be conscientious about the partnerships that we're building in our community. We want to be thoughtful about who we're reaching out to, and we want to be exploring those new opportunities and taking the time to look for them. Like I mentioned earlier, this idea of kind of the blue ocean, like you don't want to be, wedding photography is wonderful. If you Google wedding photographers in Colorado, there are probably about 2,000 of them. And it's great. Our team photographs a lot of weddings, but there are a lot of things that we can do where there's virtually no competition, or we can come in and do something in a totally different way, right? You can be the Sex Pistols taking the stage and saying it doesn't matter if we can really play. So that's kind of where we are. The team has grown a lot. We've learned so much from them. We learn from our interns all the time too. I think that that's something we don't probably trumpet enough, but hey, I graduated college in 2003. Things are a little bit different in terms of curriculum and what's being taught and how it's being taught. Okay, that part aside, we'll get into sort of the advice-leaning portion. So the genius is in the doing. I feel like in my role now, about 90% of what I spent my time on doesn't pan out. It doesn't lead to anything. It doesn't culminate the way I think it's going to, and that's okay. I think that's actually a really central part of being an artist, is you throw the spaghetti at the wall and you see what sticks, right? That 10% that pans out often winds up taking a totally different direction than I would have imagined, or it takes root really differently. I can think of dozens of examples where we worked on something for years, either to support an organization or on an initiative we were trying to get going, and felt like it went nowhere. And then all of a sudden, this doorway opens up, and it's because we had put in that work and built the foundation. The other thing about this is that you learn from everything you do, right? That seems somewhat self-evident, but you learn what you like. You learn what you're bad at. That's such an important lesson. Like, I wish I had known 15 years ago what I was really bad at. I would have skipped that whole section. But the truth is that the time that you put into even that work informs what you do going forward. And it makes you receptive to other opportunities. It makes you understand where you need to reach out for help, which is another big part of being an artist. The other thing that the doing allows you to do is get feedback. And I get it. Nobody loves receiving criticism, but it's the only way that you really, really grow as an artist. And so being active, asking people what's wrong, quote unquote, with what you're doing, what could be done differently, what could be done better. We work really hard to make people happy every day with what we do, but there are going to be 4 and 3 and occasionally 1-star reviews from people. There are going to be clients who get back to us and say, I'm not happy about something. And you have to move beyond the personal feelings there and say, what's the truth in this? Where is this person coming from? And what can we take so that the next time this happens, it's a different outcome, right? We're avoiding repeating the same mistakes. And art critiques work exactly the same way. You're learning where you're strong, where you're unique, where you're distinctive, and you're honing in on those things. And you're learning to abandon the areas where you're weaker or where you're just not getting that same kind of traction. Talked about, oh good, I'm on the same page still, that's great. So regardless of the art form, I'm just going to go full in and say that every artist is an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is just saying that I want to create something for a living. And it's sort of neither here nor there what that thing is. It's a product, it's a service, it's an idea, it's a book, it's a painting, it's a photograph, it's a movie. When we went to college and went through the art school process, I felt like it was sort of, now in hindsight, sort of scandalous how that part was really downplayed. Everything was focused on the art and the process and creativity, and nothing about, by the way, in 4 years, you're going to be outside of these doors, and now you need to pay your rent. So having a little bit of the entrepreneurial mindset can be really healthy. We even had people tell us within the structure of the schools that we went to, like, what are you going to do? Like, well, that's why I'm here. I'm paying a lot of money to be here so you can teach me to do this. I don't want to do something else. And to that end, I just want to say that it's completely viable. It takes time. The year we started our business, we had a friend who was on unemployment, who was making more money than we were, which was completely demoralizing, but put us in that position where we're like, let's do it. We can't really sink any lower. I mean, a little bit, but not that much. And as someone who never took a single business class in all of college, who avoided it like the plague because it's evil and bad and you don't want to be part of the system, it's not a bad word. It's just a tool, right? Entrepreneurship is a tool, and it's all about how you wield that. And so you can be someone who becomes successful and hoards your riches, or you can be someone who uses that for the greater good. You can utilize the same tool sets that every business owner uses in the service of your art and the things that you're making. To prove that point, here's a list of 10 entrepreneurial traits, and it's incredible. They are describing artists, except maybe for the last 2 things. So creativity, absolutely, right? Gotta have that. Passion, fundamental. Discipline, you work on it, right? You get there, but everybody knows that that's critical. You have to have the discipline to go in and work on your craft. My grandfather on my mom's side was a really prolific author, and he had his office in her house, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, he would go downstairs into his office, and he would write for 8 hours, and then he'd come back upstairs. And that was his day. That was how he created discipline and structure in his world as an artist. Open-mindedness. Oh my gosh, artists are the most open-minded people on the planet. Self-starters, again, some of us have to work on that maybe a little harder than others, but without that piece, the art doesn't get made, right? There's no doing. Strong work ethic, very correlated. Competitiveness, I've met very few artists in my life who are very happy to just be a mediocre artist, right? I think that's sort of intrinsic in all of this, is we feel a certain calling and think that we have something unique to offer. And determination. You know, to this day, there are months where I'm like, oh my Lord, why aren't we doing as much work this month as we did last year? And you gotta psych yourself out of these negative mental tailspins. You gotta stick through things. Everybody, I think, hits that point too when they're working on an art piece. They're just like over it. It should have been done a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. And you just wanna have the completed thing. So you have to have the determination. Now, people, okay, I will grant that. We are not notorious for being people. I loathe networking. It's such a gross thing. I hate that feeling of having to walk into a room with people I don't know and talk to them. So a few years ago, I kind of flipped the script for myself on how I viewed that aspect of what I had to do. And I said, I'm not going to do that again. I'm never just going to go to a room full of people because there might be people there I should meet. I'm going to step back and think really deliberately about the people in our orbit professionally, artistically, who are doing things that I love. And I want to be friends with those people. As simple as that. Who are the people I want to be friends with where we also share this alignment in terms of something artistic, something in terms of our career trajectories? And that was it. I focused on that, and it's incredible how once you make that shift and you just view it as building friendships where you're not coming out with an outstretched hand, you're asking people how you can help them, how you can be a part of something that they're building, people are really receptive to that. And it's engendered so many, many good things. Confidence, that's the other big one. I'm okay up here talking to all of you. Later, Nina will probably be handling most of your one-on-one questions, because that's not where I feel confident. But the truth is that confidence comes from doing the work. The more you do, the more you go through that iterative process of making art, the more confident you become, the more you see the growth in your own body of work. And so that piece kind of takes care of itself. I'll throw the caveat there that not everybody is good at everything, and it's okay to ask for help and get that support in areas where you don't have the confidence and maybe won't ever have the confidence. That's all right. This one I think is pretty self-evident in terms of seeing new opportunities, because I think that fundamentally every artist wants to have a singular voice. They want to do something that sets them apart from everyone else. I have a Post-it note on, well, usually this isn't my computer, on my computer that says, see new opportunities. I literally have to look at this thing every day. And it's there very intentionally to shake me out of any kind of complacency and force me into that thought process of like, what are we not doing right now that we could be doing, that we should be doing? Who are we not talking to that we could be talking to? It's definitely related in that way to Kaizen, the continual improvement, right? It's just a reminder to get into that mindset. And again, this doesn't just have to be about you. This is you doing the outreach. It's you thinking about the friends that you want to make, the organizations you want to support. So much of what we do right now came from that, from going to the narrators at the Buntport Theater and saying, oh my gosh, there's this beautiful monthly storytelling show in Denver that is the coolest thing that the city has going on. Maybe we can partner with them. Let's talk to them. Let's see if there's something that we can provide. The High Plains Comedy Festival, the Denver Film Festival, all of these really, really rewarding relationships that we've built came from that really tiny kernel of just saying like, maybe we can be a part of that and contribute something that adds value to your thing. instead of trying to do all of the lifting on our own. We're almost at the end, but I have a spooky Halloween bonus, and it's to do the scary things. And I will say, without exception, all of the most fulfilling things in my life, personally, professionally, creatively, have come from doing scary things. Moving away from home, getting married is a little scary. I love you, but it's a little scary. Having children, starting a business. We were talking about this yesterday. When we hired our first employee, it was so intimidating. She was actually relocating from Texas to come work with us. And we were plagued with these thoughts, right? These, like, what if? What if 2 months from now, our business falls apart and we can't pay her, and now she moved, she uprooted her life to be here. All of these things, venturing out into new territory as photographers, saying like, we don't know a ton about food photography, but we trust that we have the knowledge to do it, and that if somebody else is doing it, we can probably do it at least close to what they're doing, if not better. That confidence piece that gets earned from doing the work. All of these things, giving a talk to a room full of people, the scary things. And that's really important, because usually the people in your life, I won't say usually, a lot of times, people in your life will try to talk you out of doing the scary things. And then it becomes a really convincing argument in your own head. Like, well, I don't know about it, and they're saying I shouldn't do it. You gotta trust that. If something in your life is a little bit frightening, it's probably the best indication that you should go ahead. The first time you ride a roller coaster, it's scary. The 10th time, not so much. It's a great thing to get habituated to, is taking those risks. And at the risk of undercutting everything that I just said, I sort of alluded to it at the beginning, that every expert, we'll use that term in quotes, begins at the same place. It's a place of total ignorance. It's a total lack of experience, right? And it's just this incremental process of taking those risks, of doing the work, and then you get to that place of confidence and mastery, and then you can say, what's next? So what's next, y'all? That's our info. If anybody wants to stay in touch after the fact, Nina and I are going to take questions. Come visit us at Stanley Marketplace if you are ever on the east side of town. I know we're kind of diametrically opposed here, but we'll make you some coffee and sit down. Or if you're 21, we'll pour you some wine. But again, thank you all for being here on a cold day, braving the snow. Thank you again for having me. To everybody at RMCAD, it's been really lovely. Thank you.
Before you all head out, I'm going to make a couple of announcements, but do stick around. We have a little bit of time to ask both Nina and Danny some more questions, so stick around. There's probably some more soup too. But I just want to invite you all back here for the next Wayfinding speaker. One of our faculty members, actually Jess Moore, she teaches in Foundations. She's going to present about how to price your work. So that will be Thursday, November 7th, 1:30. Again, we'll have more snacks and good stuff, but definitely be sure to join us for that. And then also grab one of these cards on your way out. The next visiting artist is here on campus next Tuesday. Melissa Thorne will be the second speaker in the VASD program's Pattern Series. So that takes place, her artist talk, public artist talk will be next Tuesday, the 15th in the Mary Harris Auditorium. And then of course her next day Q&A lunch next Wednesday, the 16th in Spivak at 11:45. So grab one of these with all those details. Let's give it up for Danny and Nina both.